A 93-year-old World War II veteran shares his incredible journey of courage, service, and patriotism in court that will leave you speechless. Also, please comment where you're listening from, and if you enjoy stories like these, subscribe for more stories. The courtroom buzzed with energy as people shuffled to their seats, but all eyes turned to the silver-haired gentleman entering through the heavy wooden doors. Mr. Albert Finch, walking slowly but proudly with the aid of a cane, exuded an air of quiet dignity. The judge tapped his gavel. "Mr. Finch, you're here for a traffic violation, a red light on Pleasant Valley Parkway." Finch nodded, his voice steady. "That's correct, Your Honor. First time in 72 years of driving." A ripple of laughter spread through the room, but it quickly turned to curiosity as the judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Finch, the records show you're 93 years old. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir," Finch replied, adjusting his stance. "And a World War II veteran." The room fell silent, and the judge leaned forward. "I think we need to hear more about this. Mr. Finch, please, tell us your story." Finch smiled faintly, his eyes glimmering with memories. "Well, Your Honor, it all started when I was just a boy." The courtroom leaned in as Albert Finch began narrating his journey. His voice, though weathered with age, carried a strength that captivated the room. "It was 1942, and the world was at war," Finch began, gripping his cane tightly. "I was just a boy in Providence, Rhode Island. My father, a World War I veteran, used to tell me stories about the trenches in France. He didn't glorify war, he hated it, but he believed in service. He'd say, 'If your country calls, you answer.' When Pearl Harbor was attacked, I knew what I had to do." Finch described sneaking into the church on Federal Hill to forge his birth certificate. "I was 16, but I made myself 17. I was tall for my age, and I figured I'd get away with it, and I did, for a while." The room chuckled softly, but Finch's expression grew serious. 2 weeks later, the Navy found out. I thought I was going to jail, but my father, he intervened. He told me, 'Son, if you still feel this way next year, I'll support you, but you need to finish what you started at home.'" The judge nodded. "And did you?" "I did," Finch said firmly. "On my 17th birthday, I enlisted. By February 1943, I was aboard the USS Alabama, headed for the Pacific." Finch recounted his first day aboard the battleship. The Alabama was a beast of a ship, 35,000 tons of steel and firepower, but to me, it felt like another world. I was a kid from a small town, suddenly surrounded by men from every corner of the country. The audience chuckled when Finch described his initial clumsiness. "I was seasick for the first week. The crew called me Land Legs Finch, but I learned fast. There wasn't much room for weakness out there." Finch's voice softened as he described meeting Billy Carter, the ship's cook and his closest friend. "Billy was the heart of our crew. He could make jokes during an air raid and still whip up the best cornbread you'd ever tasted. We leaned on each other, especially when things got tough." Finch's first battle came near the Gilbert Islands. His voice trembled as he described the chaos. "The air was filled with smoke and the deafening roar of our guns. We were under constant attack from Japanese planes. One kamikaze got too close, and I froze." The room held its breath as Finch recounted the moment he snapped out of his terror to help load ammunition for the gunners. "I wasn't a hero, I was just scared out of my mind. But we survived that day." The judge leaned forward. "What about your friend Billy?" Finch smiled faintly. "Billy? He cracked a joke right after the attack, said, 'If they want to hit us, they'll need to aim better than that.' He always knew how to lighten the mood." The courtroom grew somber as Finch spoke of Iwo Jima. "That was the worst. We provided cover fire for the Marines storming the beaches. I'll never forget the sight of them wading through red water, trying to dodge bullets. We lost so many boys that day." Finch's voice broke as he described his crew's effort to save survivors from a sinking destroyer. "We pulled as many as we could out of the water. Some were too far gone. Billy was there, helping me lift a Marine who'd lost both legs. He just kept saying, 'We're not leaving anyone behind.'" The judge removed his glasses, wiping his eyes. "And Billy?" Finch's expression darkened. Billy didn't make it through Iwo Jima. A kamikaze hit the deck, and he didn't make it." The courtroom was silent, save for a few sniffles. Finch shared how writing letters helped him cope with the war. "I wrote to my mother every week, but I never told her the full truth. I didn't want her to worry." He described how the letters became a lifeline for the crew. "I started writing for the others, letters to their families when they couldn't find the words. When Billy died, I wrote to his mother. That was the hardest letter I ever wrote." The judge interjected. "Do you still have those letters?" Finch nodded. "I kept copies of some. They remind me of the men we lost and the families who waited for them." Finch described returning home in 1945. "The war was over, but I felt like a stranger in my own town. People called us heroes, but I didn't feel like one. All I could think about was Billy and the others who didn't make it back." He struggled to adjust, battling nightmares and guilt. "My father helped me. He said, 'Son, the best way to honor them is to live a good life.' That's when I decided to dedicate my life to helping other veterans." Finch detailed his post-war efforts. "I started organizing fundraisers and visiting hospitals. Veterans face battles long after the war ends: depression, homelessness, addiction. I wanted to make sure they didn't fight those battles alone." He shared letters from veterans he had helped. One read, "Mr. Finch, you saved my life when I thought I had no one left. Thank you for believing in me." The narrative returned to the present. A man in the audience stood up. "Judge, I'm here because of Mr. Finch. My father was a Marine at Iwo Jima, and he always said Mr. Finch's ship saved his life." The courtroom erupted in applause, and the judge dismissed Finch's case with a smile. "Mr. Finch, you've given more than most of us can imagine. This court thanks you." As Finch left the courtroom, the judge and everyone else stood and saluted, honoring the quiet hero whose story had touched them all. After leaving the courtroom, Albert Finch returned to his modest home, a quaint bungalow adorned with well-tended flower beds. He shuffled into the living room, setting his cane by the door and lowering himself into his favorite armchair. On the small table beside him sat a stack of weathered letters tied with a fraying ribbon. He untied the bundle and carefully unfolded a letter written decades ago, addressed to a grieving mother. "Dear Mrs. Carter," he read softly. "Billy was not just a great friend. He was the bravest man I've ever known. He made us laugh even in the darkest moments, and he gave his all to keep us going. I promise to live a life worthy of the sacrifices he made." Finch's voice cracked, and he wiped his eyes. He had written hundreds of letters over the years, but Billy's death haunted him most. A knock at the door broke the stillness. When Finch opened it, he found a young man in military uniform standing on his porch. "Mr. Finch?" the young man asked. "My name's Private James Carter. Billy Carter was my grandfather." Over a cup of tea, Private Carter shared stories passed down from his grandfather. "Billy always talked about the Alabama. He said you were like a brother to him. He told my dad that without you he wouldn't have lasted as long as he did out there." Finch's heart swelled with pride and sorrow. "Billy saved me more times than I can count. He kept me going when I wanted to give up." The young soldier hesitated. "Mr. Finch, I've joined the Navy to honor his memory. I want to carry on the Carter legacy, but I'm scared." Finch placed a reassuring hand on the young man's shoulder. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, son. It's doing your duty despite it. Billy would be proud of you. So am I." As the two talked, Private Carter revealed a box of old photographs and letters Billy had sent home. Among them was a photograph Finch had never seen. Himself and Billy, arms around each other, smiling after a battle. "Can I keep this?" Finch asked, his voice trembling. "Of course," Carter replied. "It belongs with you." The next morning, Finch visited the local VA hospital where he regularly volunteered. As he walked the halls, he stopped by a room where a young Marine sat in a wheelchair, staring out the window. "Hey there, soldier," Finch said, pulling up a chair. The Marine glanced over, his face marked with frustration and pain. "What's the point, sir? I came back in one piece physically, but up here," he tapped his temple, "it's a mess." Finch nodded, understanding. "I know that feeling well. After the war, I thought I'd never feel normal again. but let me tell you, you're stronger than you think, and you're not alone." He shared his own struggles with PTSD, how he leaned on friends, his father, and eventually found solace in helping others. By the time Finch left, the Marine smiled faintly for the first time in weeks. At a town council meeting later that week, Finch advocated for better resources for local veterans. He shared stories of those who had fallen through the cracks, homeless vets, those battling addiction, and families struggling to support loved ones with PTSD. "Freedom isn't free," Finch told the room, "and we owe it to those who fought for it to give them the support they need when they come home." His speech moved the council to allocate funds for a new Veterans Resource Center. Finch's decades of quiet advocacy had finally made a lasting impact. One evening, Finch received a surprising call from a senator. "Mr. Finch, we've heard about your efforts with veterans and your incredible story. We'd like to invite you to Washington to speak at the Capitol." Though hesitant at first, Finch agreed. A week later, he stood before a packed room, sharing his wartime experiences and calling for greater support for the men and women who had served. His speech went viral, and letters of gratitude flooded in from across the country. Veterans wrote to thank him for giving them hope, and young people were inspired to serve their communities. After his Washington speech, Finch was approached by a woman in her 60s. "Mr. Finch, my father always spoke of a sailor who saved his life during the war. He described you perfectly." The woman handed Finch a photograph of her father and himself, taken during the rescue of the destroyer's crew. Tears filled Finch's eyes as he remembered the mission. The woman clasped his hand. "You gave me a father, Mr. Finch. Thank you." In the years that followed, Finch mentored dozens of veterans and young service members, sharing his wisdom and experiences. He helped establish scholarships for military families and spoke at schools to ensure future generations understood the sacrifices made for their freedom. At 95, Finch attended the unveiling of a monument honoring local veterans. His name was among those engraved, but he deflected the attention to others. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about all of us, those who served, those who supported us, and those who gave everything." As the crowd applauded, Finch felt a deep sense of peace. In his final days, Finch sat on his porch reflecting on his journey. Letters from veterans, photos from his service, and newspaper clippings of his speeches surrounded him. Private James Carter, now a lieutenant, visited often, bringing stories from his deployments. One evening, Finch wrote the final entry in his diary. "For Billy, for my crew, for every man and woman who gave their lives for something bigger than themselves, I hope I made you proud." When Albert Finch passed away peacefully in his sleep, his legacy lived on in the lives he had touched and the stories he had shared. Albert Finch's story isn't just about one man's bravery during World War II, it's a testament to the enduring spirit of the greatest generation. From his decision to join the Navy at just 17, to his harrowing experiences in the Pacific, and his lifelong dedication to helping veterans, Finch's journey reminds us all of the sacrifices made for our freedom. Through resilience, humility, and service, Finch left a legacy that will inspire generations to come. His life teaches us that courage doesn't end on the battlefield. It's in the way we live, the people we help, and the values we pass on. As Mr. Finch said in his final days, "For every life lost, I hope we live lives worthy of their sacrifice." If this story moved you, consider honoring veterans in your own community. Volunteer, donate, or simply take the time to listen to their stories. Let's ensure their sacrifices are never forgotten. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more incredible stories of courage, kindness, and the indomitable human spirit. Together, let's keep these legacies alive. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.